Good morning. We are going to be at the end of John chapter 9. Been on this chapter several weeks now, but it is a I think, a very pivotal chapter in our understanding who Jesus is, that he's not just another prophet, not just another interesting person. He is indeed someone, as the blind man, as we noticed last week, was able to worship, and of course we are only to worship God. So we'll look a little bit more in that idea as we continue on, but right now let's begin our class with a word of prayer. Our Father in God, we are so thankful for the many, many blessings that we receive each and every day. We pray to God that we might not take these for granted, that we might understand where our blessings come from. Help us to use these blessings in your service. Be with us this day as we open your word together. We ask that we can learn of you, that we might apply those things to our lives and be able to teach them to others. Forgive us where we go wrong. In the name of your Son we do pray. Amen. John chapter 9. The entire chapter is dealing with the concept of blindness. It starts off with physical blindness, but it ends up with a spiritual blindness. Again, sort of recapping the story just really briefly, Jesus comes across a blind man. He mixes up some mud and some of his spit. He puts it on the man's eyes, tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. When he does that, the man is capable of seeing. This causes a disturbance among the Pharisees especially. They even questioning, where did this power come from and who is this person? So they began to question the blind man. First of all, seeing if he was lying. When they could not catch him in a lie, they even brought his parents in to ascertain whether or not the young man was lying or whether indeed he was born blind. And the parents said, well, this is our son. We know he was born blind, but we don't know how he has received his sight. They kept questioning him, and finally it boils down to the fact that they do not believe that Jesus Christ, or that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the one that was promised to come, and threatened him that if he were to admit that fact, then he would be cast out of the synagogue. He admits that Jesus is a prophet. He admits that no man can do the things that Jesus had done unless he is from God. Again, there was that questioning as to where Jesus had come from. And the Pharisees are adamant in saying he did not come from God. But the former blind man said, that's interesting. You don't know where he comes from, but yet you know definitely it doesn't come from God. How can you know that? Continue questioning. Finally, the man is kicked out of the synagogue. He is, we would call it disfellowship or excommunicated from the Jewish community. He leaves them and again comes across Jesus. And Jesus asks him, do you believe in the Son of Man? And we talked about this to a large extent, both Sunday evening and last Sunday morning, concerning the fact that this is a phrase that is used in the Old Testament to reference the idea that indeed the Messiah, the one that was promised, was going to come to all people and not just to the family of Israel. So that Son of Man indicates that there is some, indeed there is a physical connection Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. So he takes on the form of human beings. So therefore the Son of Man is appropriate, but he's also the Son of God. It's interesting, in the opening centuries of Christianity, there was this discussion that had taken place as to it essentially dealt with, we would say, percentages. How much of Jesus, while he's on the earth, how much is human and how much is divine? Well, the ultimate answer, not accepted by everyone, but the ultimate answer was that he is 100% God and 100% man. We say that's too much percentages. Well, we're not dealing with a typical human being here. We are dealing with Emmanuel, God with us. So the Son of Man becomes an interesting statement, especially in reference to the Messiah. Now, notice Jesus says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the blind man does not question, "What do you mean by Son of Man?" That is already understood because the phrase is used in several places in the Old Testament. So it's not a matter of, "I don't understand what you're saying." It's a matter of, "I don't know who this particular person is. If you point him out to me, I will believe." Jesus says, "That would be me, the one that healed you. You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you." And he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Again, if Jesus is from God, just period, whether you want to just describe him as a prophet or a man of God, if he comes from God, he would understand that only God should be worshiped. So when this man begins to worship Jesus, if Jesus is not God, then Jesus should have corrected him and said, "No, I'm only a man, a prophet of God or whatever, but I am not one who should be worshipped." But Jesus does not stop him. So a very good indicator here that Jesus is, yes, as described, Son of Man, but he's also God, worthy of our worship. All right, now, that discussion ends. Anybody have any questions down to that point? That's where we left off last week. Yes, Roger.
A lot of this goes back to Abraham, and I wonder, didn't they keep up with Abraham? I mean, years later, how come they say, "Well, this man isn't from God"? Well, obviously, Abraham, when you read the context, he believed God, did what God told him to do, and where are they at with this?
Okay, well, you understand, again, we have the benefit of hindsight. We can look back on the situation with all the information that they have in the Old Testament, and there's a lot concerning the coming of the Messiah. But in their perspective, it's all dealing with a physical nature of whoever this person is. And again, there is this. Many of you know, or some of you probably know, Ron Thomas, who is a preacher at Rio Grande right now, has done a lot of study in Jewish literature, has a lot of Jewish books, and he likes reading their description of the coming of Messiah. How do they view the coming Messiah? And it's interesting because in many respects, they do not believe the coming Messiah was going to be on an equal par with Moses. Even though Moses stated, "The one coming after me is the one that you need to listen to." The Jews don't really accept that idea. They accept the fact that he is going to be more like David, again, a ruler from Jerusalem, but not as much a spiritual leader as Moses was. So it's interesting to look at their description. So this Son of Man, in their perspective, is the idea that this is going to be a human being. They have no concept that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. So how do they view the Messiah coming? More of a physical person, a physical entity that's going to rule from Jerusalem. And we see that throughout. Whenever, several occasions, we see the Jews wanting to take him by force and put him on a throne. And again, missing the spiritual nature entirely, thinking only physical. You brought up an interesting statement concerning the concept of the children of Abraham, because the Jews more frequently want to use sons of Abraham or children of Abraham in reference to the coming Messiah. They do not want, or they, I won't say don't want to, but we'll find less frequently their use of the Son of Man, because the Son of Man is very generic. Son of Abraham is more important in their aspect. We talked about this last Sunday evening in relationship to the looking at the a general view of the book of Luke. Luke, interestingly enough, writing to primarily Gentiles, more specifically probably Romans, Luke wants to take the genealogy of Jesus all the way back to Adam, who Adam says is the Son of God. Or Luke says Adam is the Son of God. Look at Matthew's genealogy. Matthew goes back to Abraham. Now, why didn't he go back further? Because Matthew's writing to Jews, and their concept of the Messiah is only important if you can take him back to Abraham. So this constant phrase, we are children of Abraham, specifies to them that they are superior to any other people on the face of the earth. So therefore, this becomes important to understand that whenever we have the phrase, children of Abraham, it's more of a Jewish concept. But whenever you spread out and talk about Son of Man and see in the genealogy of Jesus not only Jewish people, but sometimes Gentiles and sometimes women. Again, a broader concept indeed, that Jesus came for all mankind. Jesus did not come for the children of Israel alone. Did he come for the children of Israel? Absolutely. That was his primary mission, to speak first to the children of Israel. But then he branches out. He will go into Sidon, and he will go into Tyre, and he will go across the Jordan River into the Decapolis and other areas, showing that he primarily came to the Jewish people, but his worldwide concept is in view as describing himself as the Son of Man. Yes?
It should not surprise us, okay? Because when you talk about Moses and then referencing Moses being greater than the Messiah to come, right? They didn't listen to Moses.
Yes. Well,
okay? You know what I mean?
They would argue with that.
Well, I argued 40 years in the desert, turns the clock on that one.
Right.
So it really shouldn't surprise us. And if you look at the state of Christianity today, it mirrors exactly what happened to Jewish people. You start getting men involved, and instead of what you're always quoting, being faithful to God, they try to be faithful to themselves. And once that happens, and like I said, you go all the way back to the children of Israel in the desert. They've always bucked it. Okay, to the end. I was thinking about when they moved the Ark of the Covenant, even though they weren't supposed to, and then tipped, and the guy touched the Ark and killed him. Okay, and it was a direct message: you're not listening, okay? And then you think about how many times they warn them and stuff, and it just goes back to the idea that you have to be faithful.
Okay, now look at the Jewish concept. No, that's the concept that we get because we've 2,000 years removed looking back. But look at their perspective, at the culture, at their period of time. Were they, and again, this don't know how to phrase this exactly, but were they concerned about obedience over the concept of being children of Abraham?
No, exactly. That's the point. They were stuck up.
If anything came between the phrase children of Abraham and God, they become upset. It makes no difference if it was an accurate assessment. Jesus gave them accurate assessments, and they accused him of being, a speaker for Beelzebul. They accused him of deception and everything else. All right, why? Because Jesus was trying to show them that just being called a son of Abraham was not enough, that they needed to get back to the concept of faithfulness.
Well, and it goes back to the idea of how could he, no prophet could come from Nazareth, right?
No prophet coming out of Nazareth, out of Galilee.
Okay, so they're already framing it from almost a condescending standpoint. Okay, in other words, what their concept was more about one of us taking a position where we're still all have our position. For them, the idea of an outsider coming in that wasn't in part of their clique or their group terrified them. It boiled down to them losing power.
Yeah, and you'll see Paul dealing a lot with this. John, there was a philosophy starting whenever John was writing, and the philosophy is called Gnosticism. Gnosticism relies upon knowledge. The more knowledge you get, the closer you are to God or spiritualism or whatever the case might be. And Paul and John and others try to nip that in the bud, saying there's more important things than knowledge of God, and that is the idea of being faithful to God. It's interesting to see some of these concepts come out, because if you lean one way or the other, you're going to lean off course.
If you add your own thing to it.
Yes. So now you understand, Jesus is now getting back to John chapter 9. Jesus is now in the middle of this mess that the Pharisees find themselves in. They claim that they have more knowledge than the blind man. Who are you? You're just a man born as a sinner. You have no concept. We, on the other hand, are the Pharisees, and we've got all this worked out. And the blind man again does something which is out of nature for people at this period of time. He challenges the popular way of thinking. Now, today we have people demonstrating and trying to get people to think differently and so on. That's an everyday occurrence for us. We see people protesting something that other people believe all the time. And it doesn't strike us as anything special. At this period of time, when you speak out against the establishment, whatever that establishment is, whether it's the Roman government or in this concept, the Jewish philosophy, whenever you step outside that and you challenge them, you are a heretic. We don't have to prove you wrong. As soon as you challenge us, the challenge is placed upon us, you are automatically wrong. All right? So you don't challenge people of authority. And so when this blind man challenges their way of thinking, well, how do you know he doesn't come from God if you don't know where he comes from? Well, that's a challenge. That's a slap in their face. You say he's just a man or a liar or a person sent from the devil, and yet from the beginning of time we don't have a case of a man healing a person born blind, and yet he has done that. How do you explain that? And they don't have an answer for that. They just criticize him more. Well, you're stupid. You're born in sin. You don't know what you're talking about. So he stands firm. And where other people at this period of time, I can't expressly state the feelings of the parents. They know that if they challenge this authority, they are going to be cast out. So they are walking a tightrope. They don't want to lie, but at the very same time, they don't want to challenge the authority. So their perspective is, okay, we'll tell the truth as far as we know. What is the truth? He's our son. He was born blind. How he was healed, we got no idea. That's the end of their statement. Notice the blind man doesn't stop at statements like that. He goes on and says, hey, I was blind yesterday. Today I see. You tell me how this came about. That's the question they are asking him, because they don't believe he was born blind. They believe there's a lie or deception taking place or something else. They can't prove that. That's their belief. All right. And just for them to express that belief shows the authoritative picture from the cultural aspect. The Pharisees are making a direct statement. You don't challenge them. And he does over and over and over again. So it's interesting how this plays out. So his faith is not wavering an inch. He knows that Jesus is special. Who is he? Again, his honesty says, I don't know who he is. I've never even seen him. So, what can I tell you about him? I don't know anything about him. It's amazing to me, though, that you are saying he's not from God, and yet he healed me. How do you get around that? All right. So the evidence points to what the blind man is saying, but they keep challenging not the evidence. They challenge the character of the person doing the speaking. And again, you see this happening all the time. Politics or religion or whatever. If you can't defeat the argument, defeat the person making the argument. You criticize him and say, well, you can't listen to him. Well, he did this or that or the other whenever, 30 years ago, he did this. How can you trust him? Come on, give me a break. What have you done 30 years ago that you are no longer doing because you don't want to do it? It's something you've learned. I don't want to do that anymore. We've all changed. And the interesting question is, do we change for the better or do we change for the worse? All right, now, in this situation, Jesus now identifies himself. The man has gone from I don't know who he is to saying, I believe him to be a prophet. And then he goes further, and when Jesus identifies himself, I believe in the Son of Man, I believe you are the Son of Man, and begins to worship him. He goes from I don't know who he is all the way to worshiping God, who is Emmanuel, Jesus with them at that period of time. You talk about a long journey in a very short period of time. Here's a good case of that. All right, now, this is the statement. The man begins to worship him. Now, notice what happens. We go from we've already looked at the Pharisees' spiritual blindness to a great degree so far, but now Jesus takes it up in particular. He says in verse 39, and I'm going to read 39 through 41. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Jesus made a similar statement. I'm going to deal with the last part here first. Jesus made a similar statement before, whenever he was challenged by the Pharisees, and he said, "The sick don't need a doctor." Or excuse me, the sick are the ones who need a doctor, but they aren't going to seek the doctor's help if they don't think they're sick. He said, "You don't think you're sick, so I can't help you. The doctor can only heal you if you say, 'I've got a problem,' and you go to the doctor." The doctor we primarily use is over in Belpre area. Okay, that doctor has no idea what I'm feeling today, none whatsoever. Now, if I had a problem, I would contact the doctor and say, "I need to make an appointment because I've got a pain or an ache or whatever the case might be." Until that happens, it does no good for my doctor, even though my doctor may have the cure or the solution to my problem. It does me no good unless I am seeking the help of the doctor. All right. Same situation applies here. The Pharisees are saying, in essence, we don't need a doctor. In this situation, they asked Jesus a question. Are you saying that we're blind? Now, how do you answer that question in a way that's not going to turn them away? The answer is there is no way. As soon you understand, they've already concluded Jesus is wrong. The blind man was wrong. So what can possibly be said here to change the outcome? Answer is, they don't believe the miracle. If they don't see the good that Jesus is accomplishing, what's going to change their mind? Answer, they're going to remain blind. They're going to remain blind. So this is what Jesus is saying in this concept. He said, now, first of all, he makes a general statement. For judgment I came into this world. Now that, first of all, rubs against our thinking of as to why Jesus came. What other statement has Jesus said for the reason that he has come? Seek and save the lost. Is that what he's saying here? We want to say no. In reality, that's exactly what he's saying. In order to be saved, you have to admit that you're lost, right? In order to be healed, you have to admit that you have a sickness. In order to see, if you are in a blind condition, you have to first admit, I can't see. Salvation is only going to come to those who realize that we need God's help. The Pharisees, in their estimation, do not need God's help. Why? We are children of Abraham. That's it. That's their answer. We don't need anything else because God chose us. We are his special people. There is no way in the world God's going to condemn us. Now, Jesus says, for judgment I have come into this world. Yes, his mission is to seek and save the lost. But in doing so, he has to make a judgment call. The judgment call is, you have all sinned. and come short of the glory of God. Now, if you don't want to make friends and influence people, go out and call the world sinners. Just go ahead and do that. Every once in a while we see somebody on a street corner saying, you better repent, or something along that line. You're all sinners. And we look at that person and say, you're a nut. Don't we? Even though those of us who know that we are sinners look at that person and say, you're a nut. Right? But Jesus comes along and in essence says, I come to judge the world. You have to see that you are in sin before you can do something about the sin. And if you aren't willing to admit that, I can't help you. You're here and you're going to be judged. Now, what's interesting about this is that Jesus' first mission is still applicable today. In other words, his mission is still to seek and save the lost. Is that his final mission? No. That's the one that's in effect right now. He's got another mission that he stated. Whenever he comes back again, he is going to judge the world. It's the same statement. Same ultimate outcome. Those standing before God in the last day have to have done something about their sins. If they have not done anything, they are going to be lost eternally, condemned to experience the second death. But they have to come to the conclusion that they have sinned. In all of this, the Pharisees still are making the statement, we don't need your help. We don't need your help. Now, it's interesting. Let me look at the second part of the statement Jesus makes. He says, into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. Interesting. Did Jesus come to blind people? Not his intention. Are people going to be blinded by the statements of Jesus? Absolutely. The outcome is not determined by Jesus coming to the earth. The outcome is determined by my reaction to Jesus coming to the earth. In other words, what is your response to God? All right. We have the same idea concerning whenever the children of Israel were still captive in Egypt and they were slaves, and Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh, and God tells them, let my people go. All right. Now, in that context, several things come to light. It says that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, that Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and of course that Moses and Aaron hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Were those all different events? Same events. So how can the cause be God or Pharaoh or Aaron or Moses? You see, it's the same statement. God is making the statement. If you listen to God, everything works out okay. If God makes a statement to Pharaoh, is Pharaoh under obligation to listen to God? If God is superior, then Pharaoh has an obligation to listen to God. So, does Pharaoh listen to God. No. So the statement that God makes is the statement that hardens Pharaoh's heart, not because it was a God forcing Pharaoh to do a bad thing. God makes a statement, let my people go. Pharaoh has one of two options. He can ignore God, deny what God wants, or he can listen to God. What did Pharaoh do? Listen to his own heart, and he refused to let the people go. Therefore, the statement that God makes is a statement that is not wrong, and therefore the statement itself should not cause a negative reaction to Pharaoh unless Pharaoh himself thinks that he is in some way superior to Moses and Aaron, and especially to their God. You see, he's got his own gods. He thinks his own gods will protect him. And therefore he says this God of essentially a nobody people is not stronger than the gods of Egypt, and therefore I'm going to say no. So the statement that God makes is the statement that's going to harden Pharaoh's heart, but it's not a bad statement. God doesn't force him to harden his heart. The same thing, we see this in several other places in reaction to when Jesus makes a statement to people. The statement is coming from God. Jesus says, I came to do the will of my Father. So whenever Jesus makes a statement, it is the will of God that Jesus makes that statement. How do people react to it? Some accepted it, became his disciples. Some rejected it, and therefore their hearts are hardened by the very same statement. So in this idea, what is Jesus saying? I have a mission. Whenever I tell the world that they need to repent and they fail to do so, they are hardening their hearts. They are blinding their eyes to the truth. However, if I tell them what they need to do and they respond, they will no longer be blind, but have their eyes open to the truth. Denny.
Yeah, often I have heard Paul in Thessalonians being applied to Pharaoh, where Paul says that God will send strong delusions to those who love not the Lord.
Yes, same idea here. What is the delusion? Delusion is maybe there is no God, and therefore why should I listen to anything that claims to come from God? We have so many in the world today advocating the fact there is no God. Everything can be explained naturally. Okay, those people are in trouble. Why? Because God has already told them. I was reading through the book of Psalms several times in the book of Psalms. It talks about the fact that the fool has said in his heart there is no God. You can't logically make the statement there is no God. You can foolishly make that statement. But there is no evidence that you can give that would show there is no God. By the way, I like to read debate books, where especially religious debate books. And I like, how do I phrase this? I like good debating tactics. Bad debating tactics are people accusing other people and just calling them names or whatever the case might be. That's not debating. That's throwing out accusations. A real debate starts with a statement that somebody makes. All right? For instance, baptism is necessary for the remission of sins. That's a very simplified statement. And it can be, you can take a positive position, or you can take a negative position on that and try to defend the statement, or try to condemn the statement, show that the statement is not true. All right, there is if you are a good debater, you know to look at the proposition very carefully. Because first of all, you don't want to try to defend a negative. And what do I mean by that? Take this statement, there is no God. That is, now you are trying to defend a negative statement. How do you do that? How do you do that? You can't defend a negative position. It's no way possible. Someone comes up to you and says, let's say a matter of eating a particular food. We were talking about that the other day, and Carol showed me a picture. Would you eat one of these? It was a picture of a groundhog. And I could have made a statement, I have never eaten groundhog in my life. Okay? You know something? I can't prove that statement. So you mean to tell me you can't prove that you've never eaten groundhog? I've been serving dishes sometimes, at different events, especially wild game events. Sometimes you don't know what you're eating. You may think you know what you're eating, but you may not know. So the idea of defending a negative argument is you can't do it. I can't prove. By the way, I told her, yeah, I tried groundhog one time. I don't think, I'm no mood to ever try it again, but I did eat groundhog at one time. All right, but now you see, I can prove that statement. How do I prove that statement? Well, I could probably show, I don't know, probably have pictures of that event, but Debbie's the one that cooked it up. I could use her as my argument. I said, she cooked it, and we tried eating it, and the majority of groundhog went back in the ground. We didn't eat all that groundhog. All right, so, but dealing with a negative argument, you have to be careful because you can't prove a negative argument. Try to prove there is no God. How would you go about doing that? People try to do it scientifically. They can't do it. Why? Because if there's one thing the person does not know, then that could be the convincing proof that there is a God. All right, you say, well, what are you talking about? All right, again, a person says there is no God. I said, here, I have in my hand right now something that will prove there is a God. What's their response going to be? Show me. I don't want to. Because you already made a decisive argument. There is no God. And here I got proof in my hand that there is a God. You see, they can't disprove I've got something in my hand that would prove that there's a God. Because they don't know what's in my hand, which happens to be air, nothing. So you see, we have to be careful in some of the statements that we make. Don't try to prove a negative argument because you're not going to get any place. You can't prove it. All right. In this concept, Jesus says, I have come into the world to judge the world. The world is blind. It's my job to enlighten them, make them see the light. Their response, are you accusing us of being blind? And Jesus says, in reality, he says, no, I'm not accusing you of being blind. He said, I'm saying this. If you were blind, then you would not have any sin. What's he saying? What's he saying? If you knew the truth, would you ever make the statement, I have not sinned? You wouldn't make that statement, would you? Why? Because if you knew the truth, if you were not blinded, if you could see, you would come to the conclusion, you know something? I've sinned and come short of the glory of God. However, if you make the decisive statement, I am not blind, you're in trouble. Because you don't see, your eyes are not open, and yet you aren't going to open your eyes, and you will not allow anybody else to open your eyes. You're going to remain in a blinded condition. All right. Both bells have gone off. I've got to stop there. Thank you for your time this morning.